Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of the BookBaby Spotlight Podcast. My name is Sam Sedam, your host for this podcast, where we will be highlighting some of the authors, illustrators, editors, and other industry insiders in the world of self-publishing. Joining me today will be Michel Rubini, musician, composer, musical director, and now with the debut of his book, Life in the Key of Rubini, published author. He'll talk to us about his high-flying memoir, his experience working with BookBaby, and what's next from him. Rubini worked as a studio musician with the renowned Wrecking Crew, collaborating with musicians for hundreds of top 40 hits. He worked with the Jackson 5, the Beach Boys, Ike and Tina Turner, Frank Sinatra, Ray Charles, Elvis Presley, and Marvin Gaye. He performed for Jackie Kennedy. He worked as Sonny and Cher's musical director. He dated movie stars from Raquel Welch to Linda Carter. He scored numerous TV shows and movies. He even has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Suffice to say, Michel is an entertainment industry pro. But what Michel Rubini didn't know was how to publish a book. So he turned to BookBaby for help. This week, Michel was gracious enough to join us via Skype from his home in California for our interview. How did you get started in the music industry?
Well, my father was a classical, world-known classical violinist, and so I was born into a musical family, and I heard my father practicing, ever since the day I was born, and by the time I was 4 years old, I started playing the piano, and they got me started with lessons right away, and I just continued on from there. To try to make a long story short, by the time I was 14, I had become his regular accompanist when he was doing concerts in and around Los Angeles. And by the time I was 16, I was accompanying him on concert tours, all over the United States. To continue to make it short, by the time I was 18, I decided I didn't want to be a classical pianist anymore. so I had navigated towards rock and roll, and I joined my first rock and roll. Well, not my first rock and roll band, but I joined my first rock and roll band when I was about 18, and when I was 19 or 20. I was asked to join a recording band, a band that had already had a couple of hit records called the Marquettes. And they had hits back in the early 60s like Balboa Blue and Surfer Stomp. Later on, we went on to do Batman's theme. Batman! But that was the Marquettes. And that's sort of how I got started into the record business, and as I started getting to know some of the other musicians and some of the arrangers and producers in the studio recording business, they started asking me to be, to play on their sessions, and that's when I became a session musician, and fortunately for me, became one of the most called pianists in Los Angeles. So during the 60s and into the 70s, I was part of a very elite group of musicians that were later to be named the Wrecking Crew. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a member of that group. And we even have the Wrecking Crew has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Actually, it's on Sunset Boulevard, just in front of Guitar Center. There's our star there. And, my name is right there on that star. So that's how I got started.
So, Michel, talk to us about how your book project came to be.
The book took me 4 years to write. I never thought in a million years that it would take 4 years to write. I thought it was going to be a 6-month project. Mm-hmm. I never even thought to write a book. The way this whole thing happened was that an author by the name of Kent Hartman wrote a book about the Wrecking Crew, which I referred to earlier, which became an Amazon bestseller. And so pick it up at Amazon, $10.95. And
Just be advertising your book, not other people's books.
oh, I'm sorry. Well, anyway, so when Kent was writing that book in 2014, he was interviewing the guys in the wrecking crew so he could have a complete picture of the whole time period and have everybody's stories in the book that was in the crew. And so he started interviewing me, and our interviews became really extensive, much deeper and much longer than he ever intended or I ever intended. It went into hundreds of hours. And so by the time we got through with my story, he said to me, Michel, he said, you've got so many wonderful stories. He said, your life has been extraordinary. He said, you've got to write your own book. And I said, oh, come on, give me a break. I can't write. I'm not a writer. I'm a pianist. And he said, you don't have to be a writer. He said, everybody's a writer. All you have to do is put pen to paper. And he said, so don't worry about it. He said, if you write, he said, I'll guide you. I'll watch you. And he said, you send me, everything. And he said, I'll make sure that you don't go wrong. And so with his saying that to me, to be my mentor, so to speak. And like I said, by the time that happened, his book was already a million seller. And so here I have this million-selling author volunteering to help me, write a good book. It made me go forward. So I started writing, and I started off. He said to do it just chronologically, start off from when you were born and go forward, and I did. And by the time I got through with this thing, 4 years had passed, and because it was so extensive, and I had written over 600 pages. And then he told me, Michel, he said, you're going to have to cut half of this book out. He said, these autobiographies don't, usually people get tired of them after about 350 pages max. He said, you're going to have to do some heavy chopping wood. You're going to have to chop a lot of logs in half here. So finally, I got it down to 300 or so, 320 pages or something. And that's why I wrote the book, and that's how it got finished.
You mentioned in your book you played for Jackie Kennedy. What was that like?
Yeah, that might have been my most financially rewarding. That was a totally unique experience playing for Jackie Kennedy. Of course, John Kennedy, being an icon of my time, much less all time, and of course, I was appalled and shocked and saddened at his death, just like the rest of America was, and Jackie Kennedy, his wife, went into mourning for a couple of years. She wouldn't come out of her house. Mm-hmm. And finally, a good friend of hers decided that she had been mourning long enough and wanted her to join the land of the living. So she asked Jackie if she would come to dinner at her apartment in the Waldorf Astoria, in the Astoria Towers. And Jackie said, well, she said, I'll come on one condition. And her friend said, lady friend said, what's the condition? She said, I want Sonny and Cher to sing for me. So of all the strange things, and she was a big fan of Sonny and Cher. So the manager, Sonny and Cher's managers, got a phone call one day. I was actually in their office the day it happened, from this lady who said that Jackie Kennedy wanted to have Sonny and Cher perform for her, and that she would pay any amount of money if they would just fly to New York and do this one night stand in this lady's apartment. And so Sonny said, "Well, we won't charge anything. Of course, it's Jackie Kennedy. We'd be honored to play for her, and we'll be happy to fly back and do it." So during one of our Sonny and Cher recording sessions, at the end, Sonny came out and asked a group of us, 5 of us, me being one of them, if we would be interested in flying to New York to perform for Jackie Kennedy for one night. And he said all expenses would be paid, but we weren't going to be paid anything. So it didn't make any difference. Everybody said, "Of course, yeah, we'd love to go." So a week later, 2 weeks later, we all hopped on a jet plane and flew to New York and went to the Waldorf Astoria and took the elevator up to the very, very top where they have the Waldorf Towers. And this lady had an apartment there, and that was. This was like the elite of the elite. I think this lady, this particular lady, her husband and she owned diamond mines in Africa or something like that. I mean, money meant absolutely nothing to her. Right. And a very, very old lady. She was in her 80s. So we performed in the living room of this lady's apartment for Jackie Kennedy, and most notably, it was a totally unique night. But the thing that was just so sweet and showed what a real lady Jackie Kennedy was. Her escort for the night was this elderly gentleman, in his 80s and with a lot of arthritis and bent over. And she was actually holding him up, as her escort rather than the other way around. And the living room was very small. And there was about 10 people that had been invited to the dinner, 8 or 10 people. That's all we played for. And there wasn't enough seating in the living room for everybody to sit down. So Jackie, so Jackie escorted the gentleman over. Everybody sat down first, and then Jackie went over to the last chair and took the gentleman to that chair and helped him sit down in that chair. And then she sat on the floor in front of the chair and for the whole performance. So here you have Jackie Kennedy, the most beloved woman of the 20th century, being so humble and so sweet that she would rather sit on the floor in deference to an old man rather than take the position and sit down herself in the chair and put the old man on the floor. So I never forgot that about her. That's how humble and sweet she was.
I really enjoyed your story about your romance with Wonder Woman Linda Carter. How'd the two of you meet?
Well, when I was conducting for Sonny and Cher, we were doing a stint, a 1-month stint at the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas. And Linda, who had been crowned Miss World USA at that time, was touring around the country, doing ceremonies like cutting the ribbon at golf courses and doing all the things that Miss World USA does. And she happened to be in Las Vegas, actually to do exactly what I just said, to cut the ribbon at Del Webb's new golf course and new hotel that he was opening up there. And she came to see Sonny and Cher one night while she was there. And after the performance, she wanted to come backstage and meet Sonny and Cher. And so they brought her backstage. And so she was talking with Sonny and Cher in their dressing room when I walked in. As a matter of habit, I would always go to Sonny and Cher's dressing room after the first show. We did 2 shows a night, and after the first show, I would always walk in and ask Sonny if there was anything he wanted to change, or if everything was okay. Maybe he wanted to change the order of the songs, just anything. I just wanted to check with him to make sure that everything was perfect for them on stage. And so that's why I did that. So I walked in while they were talking to Linda Carter, and Sonny introduced Linda to me and introduced me to Linda. And when I shook her hand, sparks flew, and I looked into her eyes, and I was those beautiful blue eyes, and I just sunk like a ship with a hole in the bow. I went down, and so we talked for a little while, and then Sonny and Cher had to start getting ready for the next show, and so Linda and I left, and she asked me if I would escort her back to her room because she wanted to go to her room. She wanted to turn in for the night, and so I did. I walked her back to her room, and I gave her a little peck on the cheek, holding her hands, and then we didn't let go of our hands, and it became one of those movie moments in front of her hotel room door, and so we said we'd see each other later, and that was the start of our romance.
Wow, lucky man there.
Yeah. Oh, I'm extremely lucky. Extremely lucky.
Can you tell us about your editing process?
The book went through so many proofreads. It was amazing. I had it read by 2 or 3 other people, and they found things, and then I went back and I read it again, and I found things. It's like proofreading is a really tough job, because it's so easy to miss something, and inevitably there were things that were missed. But anyway, once we got through the proofreading process, and once we got the photo section straightened out, there's a 30-page photo section in my book, which isn't usually in most books. So formatting the photos so that they would show up correctly in the book, and to the largest they could be, and look the right way. That was also a chore. That was a lot of back and forth on the photo section. So that was that. But that actually, the formatting of the photo section delayed the whole thing, the process, by at least 3 months, maybe closer to 6 months, 4 months before we finally got the photo section straightened out. But it got straightened out, and then we went forward, and before I knew it, I had a book in my hands. There it was, my very own book, and it was
exciting.
Yeah, it was very exciting.
What part of the publishing process did you spend the most time on?
The cover photo and the title to the book. These were 2 things that just totally escaped me. I just didn't know. I had never thought about what the title of the book was going to be. I was just writing, and we decide on the title later. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't recommend that to other people. I think that maybe people should think about the title to their book first, so they know what they're writing about. And the photo, the cover, whether it was going to be a photo or a graphic or whatever, that also, it just took a long time. and to decide on something. But finally, we found a photo. I found a photo that I didn't even know had been taken of me back in the '60s, while driving in my car down my Mercedes convertible, happy-go-lucky, driving down the road, and someone who was sitting in the passenger seat took a photo of me. Well, at that time I had a full beard and really long hair, which was like blowing in the wind, and everybody that I had looking at the book and choosing photos, everybody said, "That's the photo you have to use because that's you. That is so you, Rubini. It shows everything in one photo." He said, "You got to put that on the cover," and so that's how that photo got there. And the title, oh my God, the title! I went through 50 titles for the book, and Suzanne DePass, the vice president of Motown Records, she discovered the Jackson 5 and signed them to the label, and so that's the short story on Suzanne DePass. And Suzanne was the one that signed me to Motown in 1974, I think it was, and she's been a very, very close friend of mine ever since. And she was the one that came up with the title for the book, so I can thank Suzanne for that.
Life in the Key of Rubini. You can pick up a copy, store.bookbaby.com. Michel, thank you so much for your time. If you're interested in being like Michel in choice of publishing, unfortunately we can't promise you Linda Carter, check out bookbaby.com or give us a call at 877-961-6878. Please also be sure to rate and follow our podcast with Spotify, Apple, and whatever other fine podcast app you use. Thanks to Jim Foley, BookBaby's Director of Operations, Brian Lipsky, our producer, and Michel Rubini for joining us today. Until next time, I'm Sam Sedam. This has been BookBaby Spotlight. Goodbye.